Hello, and welcome to Wise Up with Open Water, your regular dose of wisdom from the open water community. I'm your host, Ken Pasternak. I'm an Open Water founding member as well as a contributor. And my guest today is Jeff Jacobs. Jeff spent 36 years in human resources, including more than 20 years at Intuit and Adobe, and a decade coaching executives and executive leadership teams through strategy, culture, conflict, feedback, and organizational change. Jeff's perspective has also been shaped by serving as a board chair of three nonprofits, earning certifications in compassion and mindfulness from institutions including the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford Medical School, and spending the past decade working with incarcerated men in two maximum security prisons. Jeff is also the author of a forthcoming book, Keep Coming of Age, the lifelong practice of pursuing purpose over approval. It's quite a long list of accomplishments, Jeff. Welcome to Wise Up.
Probably more reflection on my age than anything else, Ken. I'm great, great to be here.
Your age and your continuous search for self-improvement, improving the world around you, it sounds like. I would love to start somewhere which comes from sort of where you spent decades working with leaders and leadership
Mhm.
teams, usually at the highest levels in an organization.
Yeah.
Um, when working with those groups, what have you learned about what holds people back from making progress or
Mhm.
gelling as a team?
Yeah. It's interesting the notion of what holds a team back or what holds an individual back. When we're held back, what strikes me is that's characterized by problems or challenges or conflict or not making as much progress as we'd like. And you mentioned I've worked with inmates for a number of years, and I like sharing some of those stories. What I love about that ministry is that the analogies between what I experience in the prison and in the outside world are really profound. The things that
Mm,
I've learned along the way. If you walk across the yard in the prison, you'll see that there are painted lines out on the yard, which you are not supposed to cross if you're of
mm,
a certain race.
mm,
So, in one of the conversations I had with a group of inmates, we started into the conversation about how riots break out, how fights break out, how, we're talking about how conflict occurs. And what struck me about this, Ken, is that I'm talking to a group of about six, and three of them in unison say miscommunication.
huh.
And that was not the answer I was expecting, but it is exactly what I've experienced consistently in my time working with leaders and with executive teams. There are consulting companies that want to come out with lots of fancy PowerPoints and whatnot, but I like to break things down to the basics. And it is when we are not communicating effectively, we're not engaging, we're not taking risks, we're not being explicit. And that is probably, while there's lots of things that hold us back, that's probably the singular one that stands out to me more than any other.
Mhm. That's interesting because organizations spend so much time and have invested in so many tools for communication. Why are they still not necessarily connecting with each other or reaching those points of friction and conflict?
Well, let's be clear. It's not because we are bad people, that we're, deficient or anything of that nature. It's actually a survival mechanism. Now that sounds really strange to say when we're talking about communication. Communication and feedback are probably the topics that I've worked with teams on more than any other. And the number one factor that I hear from individuals and teams as to why they don't have hard conversations is that they're scared of damaging a relationship. But
Uh-huh.
there's more than that. It's fear of damaging my brand, fear of a lot of different things. And yet the odd thing is that if you ask leaders, do you want feedback? Everybody wants the feedback. Now, we may not always act like it. We may not always set the environment for it, but we want that feedback. And think about it. The number one reason why I don't want to provide feedback to you, Ken, is because I'm concerned about damaging our relationship. And yet, the basis of feedback is that I have information that will help you be more successful, which is really an interesting commentary. And what happens, I referred to it as a survival mechanism because literally, when we are faced with uncomfortable situations, both on the giving side and on the receiving side, we have these almond-shaped components of our brain, the amygdala, that just set us off into the
Mhm.
fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, mechanisms. So we resist and we
Mm.
avoid. So we do have lots of mechanisms to communicate, Slack channels and email, and everybody could spend 100% of their time just returning emails every day. But are we having the challenging conversations when it comes to expectations? Are we getting explicit to the point where there is no question about what success means? When we're talking about feedback, do I know exactly what's expected of me, how I'm doing against those expectations, what I need to do to improve without any doubt? And also with organizational change, we are very good at communicating what is changing, but not necessarily as much taking people on the journey and helping me with the psychological and emotional aspects that Bridges talked about in his books, Transitions. Those are very different when we talk about change management. So we're good on the communication management, not so much on the change management, which is effectively addressing these things.
So sometimes too much what, not enough why.
Yeah.
When somebody says, I have feedback for you, the first reaction might be, oh no, oh no, it's going to be bad. It's the
That's right.
amygdala talking. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, I've had an interesting experience. You probably have as well. Working in AI, working
Yeah.
with an agent and giving it something to evaluate. It typically comes back with glowing feedback, sometimes a little over effusive feedback, but it's also constructive. And I
Yeah.
wonder about, we're all working more and more with AI. What is the effect of AI on communication and on the clarity and concreteness of communication in
Yeah.
your experience?
So I will preface this by saying I'm a fan of AI, perhaps not saying it so broadly. I'm a fan of the unhealthy relationship I have formed with ChatGPT, who I call Wilson. So Wilson and I have had a relationship for a while. I like personifying him with Wilson because it also reminds me that he's nothing but a volleyball if you're fans of the Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah.
And I repeatedly have to teach Wilson not to be so complimentary.
Hmm.
Wilson will say, "Hey, I have three suggestions for you, and I think number one is the right choice." And I will respond by saying, "Wilson, I prefer number two." And Wilson will say, "Yes, I agree. That's the right choice." And I slap his hand and I say, "Wait a minute. I want you to push back." But you're right. The tendency is that complimentary, pump you up type of nature. So it's the repeated aspect that is necessary, at least in this form of AI. Now, taking AI one further, AI, when in the beginning stages, and arguably we're still in the beginning stages, it's supposed to make our life easier. It's
Hmm.
supposed to, help us be more effective with the the mundane, the repeatable processes, et cetera, so that I can save what I'm, the most complex items for me to focus on. But what we
Hmm.
have found is that expectations just seem to be rising. And I see that by the very simple mantra when you walk down the hallway, how are you today, Ken? I'm fine. Now it's not that, it's how are you today, Ken? I'm busy. That's the new normal. And
Yeah.
I think that we're seeing AI contribute to that, that we're operating at an even faster pace, which further inhibits our ability to have these difficult conversations, which require us to stop, pause, reflect, engage with authenticity, with curiosity. And that can be a challenge, as big of a fan as I am.
Hmm. Okay. So what I'm hearing is for leaders, but also others in the organization, the ability to carve out a little bit of space to think, to be clear, to construct feedback in ways that helps you understand why and how and what, um, maybe in that order, is really valuable. And what I'm also hearing is, if you're on the receiving end of feedback,
Hmm.
don't necessarily let the amygdala take over, but
Yeah.
listen and really take it in a way that helps you maybe assume positive intent and things like that. Talk a little bit about some experiences you've had being on the receiving end of feedback, difficult or not so difficult, because you've shared some stories
Yeah.
with me that I think are really meaningful here.
Yeah. I mean, I I was identified as a high potential at one point in my career, and that meant that I went through this 360, and it was an anonymous 360. And one of the bits of feedback was, Jeff is an excellent leader, teacher who frames his ideas well, etc. Same 360, I got feedback that said Jeff can be professorial in his delivery that might demonstrate a lack of empathy for the listener.
Mm,
Same 360. And on one hand, I'm thinking, wow, this person really gets me. That's fantastic. And on the other hand, I'm thinking, this is wrong. I get defensive. And, we fast forward. One company I was with for an extended period of time. I loved the company. I still do, still lots of positive, had a lot of success there. And then one day I'm sitting down with my manager for my annual performance review. And essentially, what he tells me is it's probably in my best interest to, look elsewhere, to move on, which,
mm,
you know, eh, the amygdala took over. Doesn't, if there's an exaggerated way of saying the amygdala took over, I don't know what that might be. But what did I do? What did that look like? I got defensive. I got self-righteous.
mm,
It didn't make sense to me, because I had been at this company. The leaders used words like friend to describe me. And I thought, friends don't do this. I'm managing global performance management. We
mhm.
say that if feedback comes as a surprise, you have failed. So I was struggling, and I would talk to different people to try to make sense of this. And by talking about it, that made it worse, because now I'm theoretically gossiping in a way that's unproductive. And I burned a lot of bridges in the process after this wonderful experience. And it honestly, Ken, it took me years to reestablish the self-confidence whereby I could look at negative feedback, constructive feedback, with fresh eyes and say, okay, what is my contribution to this situation?
Mhm.
Did I miss feedback along the way? Did I not make myself open to the feedback such that, you know, it wasn't worth someone's time? So, starting in a new environment, new relationships, not being seen in the same light as I was by leaders who I'd worked with for so long, but it took years for me to get there. So when you talk about things I've been involved with, leadership roles I've had, and the book I'm writing, it is not because I have it all figured out. It's because I've screwed it all up. And I believe that we learn much more from our errors, from our mistakes, from our missteps, if we can then achieve that curiosity. But sometimes it's those wake-up calls that get us there. So those are some examples of how bad I was at what I was teaching for so long.
Well, Jeff, you are hard on yourself, but also very transparent in this conversation. I appreciate that because I imagine many of us have been in the situation that you found yourself in. That we've received feedback that was either really challenging to take or the end of a professional, opportunity.
Right.
Um, but you've taken all this information, you've processed it, you've thought about it, and now as you've mentioned, you're writing a book.
Hmm.
I'm very intrigued by the idea behind your book, which you call "Keep Coming of Age."
Hmm.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that took shape and what you mean by "Keep Coming of Age."
Yeah. Let's start with the subtitle of the book, which
Okay.
really the focus of this is the pursuit of purpose over approval.
Hmm.
So, what I realized, and what was so hard for me, is that I started from the standpoint that I was living a good portion of my life seeking approval and validation. And that could be from my managers, it could be based on my brand, it could be from dad. Yes, it was definitely from dad. um, and I realized that that was getting in my way. I read a book which talked about the difference between happiness and joy. And
Mm.
happiness, this came from, it was the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And Bishop Tutu described happiness as being coming from external factors and joy coming from within. And that is a really hard thing to do. And my kids tease me, I've always been enamored with coming of age movies. So
Uh-huh.
what I started looking at after realizing my own struggle with seeking validation and approval and how it was getting in the way is I started to see that as an obstacle for other people. I started to see that in coming of age movies, when we're moving from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, what are we doing? We are passing through milestones that are brought to us by other people. We are ushered through them. Coming of age is largely, in my opinion, based on seeking validation and approval from other people. And then
Mm,
somewhere along the line, we're supposed to have come of age.
mm,
So the notion of to keep coming of age means, in my view, that we are turning this on its head. And instead of the coming of age milestones that are brought to us for approval and validation, that we create our own coming of age milestones that are based on discerning our own purpose. And purpose in this case is not the mountaintop singular, why am I alive, one thing. It's more along the lines of purposeful, because
mm,
my purpose in my 20s is going to be different than my purpose in my 40s. So living a purposeful life and continually discerning and reflecting and trying to take yourself in that direction is what the book is about. And because that's not easy, I explore how do we do that and also the obstacles that we face and how we might address those obstacles along the way, which brings us to the compassion program, especially the Stanford Medical School, the C-Care program that you mentioned in the introduction, and the role that self-compassion plays in that process.
I'm very interested in that. And I'd like to get to that in a minute. I'd like to just ask about that transition where from the external, inside or from the outside in approach of what am I supposed to be doing? Who am I supposed to be in this world to this inside out perspective of what matters to me? What do I want to
Mhm.
become? Or what's the purpose I choose to pursue at this point in my life? How does somebody know when they're making that transition? How does somebody recognize the signs that it's time to make that transition?
It is incredibly difficult.
Uh-huh.
What comes to mind for me, I spent 5 years working in a university career center.
Mm.
And this was years ago. And my colleagues, they liked having screensavers on their computers. That's,
Uh-huh.
how long ago you may recall that there used to be you could choose what words you wanted to crawl across your computer as a
Uh-huh.
screensaver. And people were loved this quote about do what you love and you can play the rest of your life.
Mm.
So they were looking at 18 and 22-year-olds to kind of discern what is it they loved, which is incredibly difficult to do. Now, I, on the other hand, was the only primary breadwinner on staff. So when I would sit down and talk to students, I would start talking to them about economic realities. The,
Mm.
um, do you want to have children? Do you want to live in the Bay Area? Do you want to own a home? Do you want to send your kids to private school? Do you want to have a dual income family? Do one of you plan to stay? I mean, these kind of realities, because one of the things we need to figure out is that for many of us, perhaps for most of us, flourishing and purpose is not going to be 100% accomplished through our careers.
Mm.
So, recognizing that, what role do we want our careers to play? And start thinking about all the variables that play into it. About 20 years ago, I realized that my identity was too tied up in my work, and I've
Mm.
enjoyed my career. I've had great jobs. The last one I had was the best job I had, best job I ever had. But about 20 years ago, I started realizing that I wanted to develop other aspects, other things that made me feel fuller. And those are the kind of reflections that we need, and they come purposefully with time and reflection. And part of the title, Keep Coming of Age, I feel like I've had more keep coming of age moments, more coming of age moments in my 50s than I ever
Mm.
had in my teens and my 20s because I was ready to process them because, I was awake to them.
And would I be right in asking that those coming of age moments were more internally driven than externally driven, more sort of sense of value and purpose and pursuit of a
Yeah.
decision to pursue that versus
Let's
not?
let's look at the concept of a wake-up call.
Okay.
So if we think about the notion of a wake-up call, I would define a wake-up call as an event that alerts us to the need for change.
Hmm.
Now, sometimes, oftentimes, wake-up calls are externally driven for us.
Hmm.
And it could be something terrible has happened. It could be a natural disaster. It could be a health scare or something along those lines. It could be a traumatic event, a lot of things of that nature. About 5 years ago, um, I was rushed to the emergency room with all the signs of a heart attack.
Mm.
And there's a longer story there, and I write about it in the book. Now, if this was a movie, that would be the singular coming of age moment that changed my life, and everything was different from that moment forward. But if we're paying attention, there are a lot of coming of age moments throughout our lives. Some are small, and we have to pay attention to them. Some grab us by the collar and say, "Pay attention." But I
Hmm.
also believe that we can generate our own coming of age moments. And it could be through reflection, it could
Mm.
be through assessment, it could be through those self assessment tests that we take when we're in college that we kind of laugh at as adults, but looking at them through fresh eyes and really assessing, what's important to me. And is it dad's voice I hear in my head?
Hmm.
Or is it really discerning what I think will bring me joy? I also think we have to look long and hard at our relationship with money because
Hmm.
I had a very unhealthy perspective. I am privileged. I'm privileged. I have choices. The book is for those that have choices. Some folks don't have the privilege of being able to take their career in different places because they're limited in those options.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that I get reminded of every time I walk into the prison, that I'm privileged, that I'm grateful, because
Hmm.
for many of those folks, it could be me there. I was just born into privilege and not. So I'm rambling on a little bit, but those are the things that come to mind when we talk about the deliberate establishment of purpose.
Hmm. I think that's really important and useful, and it also returns us to the concept of compassion, which you began to
Hmm.
talk about a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
You've talked about defining compassion very specifically, not as kindness alone, but as a set of
Hmm.
capabilities that we develop. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
So there are a lot of definitions for compassion, and one of the common frameworks is that compassion can look like two things. It could look like recognizing and taking action. So it could be recognizing suffering in ourselves or in other people and taking action with the intention of alleviating that suffering. Not to overcomplicate things, then that brings up the question of, well, if compassion is about alleviating suffering, then what is suffering?
Hmm.
And one of the definitions that I love came from my mentor at the C-Care program, Robert Cusick, and he said suffering is anytime things aren't the way we want them to be. Now, a lot of times we'll think of suffering as this grand, painful suffering, and for some people it means I ordered my steak rare and it came back medium.
Hmm.
So it depends on our tolerance of that.
Hmm.
So with that, compassion, as distinct from just empathy, compassion is about feeling, seeing suffering, and taking steps to identify to act. So how do we act? Well,
Hmm.
the model that I've put together is based on a number of different models, but it has some unique tweaks to it. It's based on four capabilities. The first one is if we are to act, we need to be aware. We need to be
Hmm.
aware of what's going on with other people. We need to be aware of what's going on with us. Now, I use compassion, but what I'm really talking about is self-compassion in the book, because I'm talking about how we treat ourselves. Many of us are very good at compassion to other people, but terrible to how we treat ourselves in the process.
Hmm.
So the first step, being aware of our thoughts, our behaviors, what's going on around us. The second component is empathy, which is
Hmm.
frequently confused with compassion. But empathy is about the feelings that we experience. It's understanding what's going on with me, what's going on with other people from their perspective, truly understanding that. But I could be aware and empathetic and still not do anything,
Hmm.
We all know we've walked past homeless people, we've missed out on opportunities along the way. So the third aspect of this after awareness and empathy is motivation. I need to be motivated. And the way I think about motivation's the energy to act when it's easier not to. I have
Mm,
to have a desire, a motivation to do this. And then the fourth area is readiness. So, whatever action we need to take, it's going to require us to do some things. Maybe the compassionate act is, Ken, you need to give me some difficult feedback, and you need to be ready to do that. So, what's your readiness in terms of finding the right words, finding the right time, having the confidence, having the courage? We all have degrees of readiness, whatever that may be. In fact, we may have degrees of readiness that apply to awareness, empathy, and motivation. So, we need to assess, not just click off what those skills are, but we need to assess how ready we are to execute, because we may decide we're not ready and I need to build up one of those capabilities, or we are. So one of the things I like, and things that I've done in my consulting work in corporations, is defining words to the point where they can be actionable. And the
hmm.
readiness piece means that if I want to be compassionate and if these four things enable that action, then I need to be able to assess how well I am aware, empathetic, and motivated. Does that make sense?
It does, and I really like the first two being about just the feelings of compassion, and the second two being about the initiative of compassion.
Yes.
Right, and the other thing I think that really was meaningful to me is that you talked about turning that inward on yourself
Hmm.
versus practicing it simply as an outward gesture.
Yes.
Because how many times have we encountered adversity and just wanted to go hide somewhere, or resisted and just said, this isn't happening, going into denial or what have you? Whereas self compassion, perhaps the awareness, the empathy, enables us to find the impetus to take action, and to be ready to do so.
You mentioned earlier that one of the things that's helpful when we receive feedback is assuming good intent.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is very important, but I think even more important is treating myself with the self-compassion to take what's being offered to me, and see if there are nuggets there, and then take what I can use, and if there are things that I can't use, be comfortable in putting them aside, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
treating myself with self-compassion. I don't need to
Mm-hmm.
act on every bit of feedback if it doesn't resonate with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. One of the pieces of advice I got when receiving bad news or coming up against a hard obstacle was the idea to tap into my curiosity. Say,
Yeah.
be curious about it. What does
Hmm.
this mean? How is this? What could be the cause behind this particular piece of information I'm receiving? How does this affect me? How does this? But I'm feeling those four pillars of your compassion practice kind of being similar in some ways to curiosity, and that curiosity is another
Yes.
human emotion that you tap into and that drives action in many cases.
I completely agree, and the word curiosity definitely shows up a lot in the book. I think curiosity is the antithesis of judgment. I'm a
Mm,
judgmental person. I will definitely, form opinions quickly, and I can't control some of the thoughts that come. I can't control the thoughts that come to my mind, but I can control how I act on those thoughts.
hmm.
So I may have a judgmental thought, but then I can recognize that's judgmental, and instead of acting on that judgment, I can get curious about it and then perhaps change the outcome.
That's terrific. I like how you tied those two concepts together for me. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your prison ministry because you brought up a story early on. It's not the kind of thing probably many of us would take on when we're busy professionals. It probably requires a big commitment of time, energy, soul. What drew you to it, and what has it brought to you?
So it's really funny, the thin line that takes us from one place to another. I could even
Hmm.
draw the line about how you and I met and how I was connected to open water and how I can just follow the connections back. And it's not that different from prison ministry. Is I got involved, I was raised in a non-practicing Jewish family. I went to a Jesuit university. one thing led to another. I'm a musician. I was attracted to the music in a lot of the faith services. I started getting involved with music ministry. That led to retreat ministry. That led to a new community of individuals. That led to an individual that spoke highly of prison ministry and the transforming effect it would have. And frankly, Ken, the first time I went, I was going probably with the mindset that we might have but not want to admit when we slow down to look at an accident on the freeway.
Mm,
I was just curious about being able to go inside the walls of a maximum security prison and then
mhm.
come out again.
Yeah.
And it's daunting because you literally go through six Sally Port locked doors to get inside, and then you are locked in a gym, sometimes with supervision, sometimes without supervision. And for those who may not be familiar with Sally Port doors, those are the ones where you enter one door, and before the next one opens, the one behind you is locked. So you're stuck. And
Mm,
do that six times, and that's what we have to do in order to get. I had that morbid curiosity, if you will. Within 20 minutes, my mindset was completely changed. And what was changed about it, and this is where the gratitude and the privilege comes into play, is we don't go in and ask the men why they're there, what crimes have
mm,
they committed. So we're trying to make small talk to get to know them. So I'm talking about, where did you grow up? Tell me about your family. And the first thing I notice is that most of these men don't have a sense for their family. They don't
mm,
have mother and father figures that they learned from. Many of them are where they are because they were raised in gang environments, and the gang environment was for protection. It
mhm,
was for role modeling, and that's what landed them in prison. And in some cases, going to prison might have been the better option than others that were available to them. That could have very easily been me. That's a privilege of birth.
mhm,
And that's what struck me about it. So there was gratitude, there was privilege, but then there was also tremendous humility because I every single time I walk in, I learn something.
mm,
And it's not me coming down from on high and, let me, the privileged, free, successful individual, share my knowledge with all of you. No, no, it's our ministry is about listening.
mm,
And I ask a lot of questions. A lot of, some of my peers may not ask a group of lifers, tell me how race riots start out on the yard. But as I get to know people, what I have found is that, you've commented on my willingness to be vulnerable in our conversation. I like to lead with vulnerability because I think it gives other people the comfort to do the same. And I did the same
mm.
in the prisons to the best of my ability. And sometimes they laugh at me, but sometimes they really appreciate the questions. And that's where the humility and my learning comes. And I feel an obligation to write about it. I've written articles on LinkedIn, and that's a lot of where my writing started, and that's some of where the book started.
That's really inspiring. And I think about this idea of getting to know these individuals as individuals with lives, with
Yes.
stories. There was one particular individual you mentioned to me earlier. I think his name was Ross.
Mhm.
Um, what was it about him that helped evolve your thinking about compassion, curiosity, purpose?
Yeah. So when we go inside, the it is largely the folks we work with, largely Black, followed by Hispanic, and then a handful of Caucasians. And Ross was one of the leaders of our ministry inside because we have inside teams.
Hmm.
And Ross was an amazing individual, just so motivational. And he would give a hug and a handshake to every person that walked in, e- even though if he crossed the yard to do the same, he would have inspired a fight and a riot. But
Hmm.
inside with us, he was the one who would be greeting everyone. He was the one that recruited people to meet with us and to be
Hmm.
part of this growing community. He was the one that would on pieces of paper he would just write. He would give sermons. He would give talks about any one of a number of things. He would write them on binder paper, and then he would give them to his mother on visiting day to type up and make copies so that he could share it with the other folks there. Ross was just an amazing individual,
Hmm.
and I looked up Ross. Most of the folks we work with have taken life in some form or another. Ross was there because of the three strikes rule.
Hmm.
His first strike was he copied a key for a government building. His
Oh.
second strike involved drug possession and sales, and his third strike was he got in a fight,
Hmm.
and then he was sent into a maximum security yard of the prison, and he turned his life around. He was a drug addict whose best friend ended up passing away, and he found purpose. And it was in this community and leading this community that he led that purposeful life. He was no longer seeking the approval and the validation of the gangs or absent family members or what he thought was important in or to get drugs or whatever it might be. His purpose started to be very personal and coming from
Hmm.
within. So Ross is somebody who is uh, a role model that I'm inspired by.
That's really inspiring to hear. Again, thinking of someone who is in maximum security prison as being a role model, that's a distance to cross for some people. But the way you've described it, the process that he went through, and that common denominator of purpose, and I don't mean denominator in sort of a low sense, but in just sort of a unifying sense,
Sure.
that that feels like a strong um, uh, an enlightening moment when meeting someone and hearing their story.
Well, and that's where it comes back to the humility because I believe that we can learn something from everyone we encounter.
Hmm.
And even if we don't find that encounter comfortable, that there's
Hmm.
something to learn there about ourselves and that we can apply to our lives going forward.
Yeah, I heard from you last time we talked, Jeff. You talked about how you get advice from people. You hear the same advice from different people,
Hmm.
and sometimes it takes different people for that advice to sink in because
Yeah.
the way you hear the story or the story that comes with the advice finally connects.
Hmm.
Um, that's what I'm hearing from your experience with Ross is that there was a moment with this gentleman, this individual, that you just said, "Oh, I got here's an aspect of life that I hadn't quite explored in this way."
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like corporate mentorship programs. You don't
Hmm.
identify a mentor and then follow that person unilaterally. You
Right.
establish a mentor because they have a skill that you want to learn from, but that doesn't mean you're going to go home with them every night and model everything that they say and do.
Hmm.
At the same time, one of the things that your comment makes me think of is the notion of imposter syndrome, the fact
Hmm.
that I'm not worthy to speak up or to lead or to do any one of a number of things. And while the first post that I put out for the world to see took me 2 weeks to write and 2 months to have the courage to post
Hmm.
because I was so scared of trolls and backlash and things of that nature. And as I started writing more and more and more, and the reality of maybe I'm writing a book, I don't know. I had lunch with a friend and an established author, and certainly a role model of mine. And I said, I'm struggling. I go into bookstores and libraries, and I look around at all this and blog posts everywhere, and what could I possibly add to the conversation that's taking place? And he looked at me plain as can be, and he said nothing. There's he now you can argue with this, but his point was there's no new ideas, Jeff, but what you can do is reach people with the same ideas couched in stories from your experience so that they can hear it from you where they couldn't hear
Hmm.
it before. And that was very inspiring to me. And those are the people that I want to write for.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That really reminds me of something. I had a mentor in my own life who was my business partner for many years, and he was a very worldly and fascinating guy and had so many stories to tell. And we brought on a new colleague who was an artist, not coming from the corporate world, but coming from the art world. And my mentor had lunch with him, and he came back and said, "You know, this guy's fascinating. everything he says, I would never think to say, but I find myself agreeing with him.
Mm,
And it was kind of the
mhm.
same thing. He said things in
Yeah.
such a way that it connected in new ways, but it was all the same. It was ideas that he'd heard before, but just expressed through a different
Yes.
a voice. And yeah, that's an amazing anecdote and an amazing experience. So you're getting ready to bring this book into the world. Um,
Yes.
what do you hope people will take away from it?
In short, my hope is that the book helps people pursue what matters most to them.
Hmm.
And that's how I think of the word purpose. Purpose is what matters most. What matters most now, in the past, in the future, and that's going to change. But I'm
Hmm.
hoping it helps people pursue what matters most and to do so authentically from the inside and to do it in community. Because I do believe that the more we live our own lives, the more we are able to pursue what matters most, the more we connect with other people. That's what I hope the book accomplishes, at least for a few people out there.
Well, that sounds terrific. I certainly look forward to it. Speaking of community, we are providing this conversation to our open water community, which is a great service. I know
Mhm.
there are listeners out there who jump at the chance to hear a new conversation. What do you hope the community might do for you?
I appreciate the question, Ken, and it's kind of the old Jerry Maguire "help me help you" kind of notion. Um, about 7 months ago, I started a community. I invited individuals to follow along on the writing process because what I found is I was interested in the stories behind the stories.
Hmm.
You know, the lessons learned that won't be part of the book. Some people are interested in what's involved in the writing process because it's a lot more challenging and there's a lot more to it than I would have thought. So, about 7 months ago, I invited people to opt into what I'm calling Friends on the Journey.
Hmm.
And what happens is for those that opt in, and they can opt out at any time, every 2 to 3 weeks, I send out a simple email, no fancy glossy newsletters, just a simple email that says, here's what I'm working on.
Hmm.
Here's something I've learned. And then here's a reflection question. And then I share the answers back that I hear from others, and the community kind of engages that way. Um, and my hope is that this community just keeps on building for those that are interested. So, what can the community of Open Water do? Well, if this sounds interesting to them, then they have the opportunity to opt in and follow along on that journey. And I don't aspire, I would much rather sell 100 copies that people read and influences their behavior than 10,000 copies that sit on a shelf. And I'm sincere when I say that. So help me find the people that might benefit from this and pass along that information. Also, if you're part of a nonprofit or a volunteer group or a business that you think can benefit from some of these lessons, I am actively doing some group sessions, both in person and virtually, on this content.
Fantastic. Well, how can people find you, Jeff, to either join this list or interact with you in other ways?
Simplest option is right there on my name for those who are watching this. And if you're listening to it, just go to my website, www.jeffjacobs.org. And there you will find my contact information and you will find the option to opt in on this journey. So once again, jeffjacobs.org.
Thank you, Jeff. This has been such a delightful conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing about your experience, what you've learned from it, what you've taken from it, and what you're doing with it. I hope I can speak for other members of the community by saying how inspired I am and how much I look forward to seeing the book when it comes out. And you'll find my name on that list in no
Uh,
short order.
Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.